and the West Africa. And this is called the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs, for those who are not familiar with Andy. And we are a network of organizations and intermediaries who are supporting entrepreneurs in the emerging market. So like I said, we work with intermediaries and not directly with the entrepreneurs, because our members actually work with the entrepreneurs. And over the years is actually to provide support to the entrepreneur system on ecosystem to know who the actors are, they play, and what kind of support we can give. And of course, during that is fun. For those who have attended person meeting before, we know this is an interesting time, which meetings have to come online. So previously we meeting in Ghana, in Senegal, and in other regions within the West Africa space. So today we're actually going to be having a fundraising best practices workshop, which is one of our goals for this year, Africa for the ecosystem players. And we one of our members foundation, that's Aspire Coronation Trust Foundation.
Hello, Joshua, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, sorry, I think I got disconnected. So with me, you just heard Natalie's voice. So we have this session is actually great because it's been a challenge for our members and other local actors actually raising before now, and even at this time it becomes more tough. So which is one of the reasons why we thought it's going to be great to share experience and to learn from other practitioners. What are the ways people are actually taking in terms of fundraising at this time? So this is why we're having this session. We have Natalie, we have Keru, and of course we have the former regional director of Growing with us on this call. So we have some instructions, for this call, use the chat box to ask questions. Limit your activities in the chat box so that we are able to see the important messages. And of course, feel free to connect with other participants via the chat box. You can reach out to them privately. And also, please mute your audio always, except the facilitator need you to actually speak. So in the next 1 to 2 minutes, I want us to introduce ourselves, and this is how to go about it. If you're on your phone or probably on a system, please go to this website and of course use this code. You'll see some questions over there, and that is what we use to introduce ourselves. We can see it actually live. Are we able to do this? Okay, you're welcome, William. Zugo, you're welcome, Fit Foundation. Hey, Camille, you're welcome, AMI. Andrew from AMI. We have 30 more seconds to do this. It's Shoma from, okay. Okay, let's go to the next question. How do you feel today? Okay, interesting. Relatable, busy, it's Monday. Okay. People feel tired. Interesting. Anticipative, blessed. It's great. Cool, awesome, hopeful. We're all hopeful. Okay, on to the last question. Okay. Adequate qualification. Find a fund that's relevant to Africa. Okay. Able to know of scarcity. Okay, thank you so much. I'm sure we have presence on the online currently, and with all these that you have listed, I'm sure the facilitator Natalie, Keru, and Gwen, they've seen some of the challenges people are facing, and of course, it will help them in terms of delivering on this session. So I think my own time is up, and I've taken more than I was given. So over to you, Natalie. Looking forward to an interesting session. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Joshua. Can you guys hear me okay? Great. So my name is Natalie from Open Capital. Keru, if you can hear me, if you could project the presentation.
It seemed like it's disabled, my screen sharing.
Okay, let me see. Apologies, guys, for the issue. Let me see if I could share it from.
Oh, I can. Let me just try to share that. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Let me know whether you can see it.
Yes, I can see it. Can everyone see it? Yes. Okay. Someone
Yes, we
said
can.
yes. Okay. Great. So let's go ahead and get started. So quickly, as Joshua mentioned, this session is around best practices of fundraising. My name is Natalie Goge Abo. I would kind of take point of running the session. I'll introduce. Sorry, Kara, if you can go as one step on the agenda. So let me just go through the agenda quickly. Yeah, before we go into the introduction. So. Co-facilitating with me today are my colleagues Keru as well as Gwen. So we'll go through a detailed introduction in a little bit. Then I'll walk you through some high-level concepts and best practices around the fundraising process for about 15-20 minutes or so. Then Gwen would kind of, what I say, I'm painting the picture of what those best practices are, and then Gwen will add the color, right, based on her rich experience fundraising. And then we'll take some questions from the audience. After that, we want to move into talking a bit more specifically around COVID and the impact it has had in fundraising. We don't want to be the only folks talking to you. We want to make this session really interactive. So we're actually going to break you into groups and have you discuss your own experience and in terms of fundraising. And then we'll bring you back together at the end just to share key highlights of your experience, and then we'll close the session. So this is going to be about, I think at this point, 75 minutes or so of really rich. So we'll share from our experience, and as I mentioned also, we want you to share and make this an interactive session. So with that, Kara, if you can go to the next slide, we'll do some intros. Okay, thank you. So my name is Natalie. As I mentioned, I'm a principal with Open Capital, and I head our West Africa work. I'm based here in Lagos, and also lead our gender practice. I'll go through what OCA does in a little bit after Keru and Gwen introduce themselves. Keru, over to you.
Thanks, Natalie. So my name is Keru Munene. So at the moment, I'm having issues with my video, so apologies that you cannot see me live. But from even photo there, so Keru Munene is my name. I'm a project leader at Open Capital and been with the firm for now 4 years and been involved supporting businesses as well as various ecosystem players in terms of refining their growth strategy and the operational, as well as helping raise capital. So I'm very excited to be part of this session.
Great. So, and co-facilitating with us today is Gwen Abiola Oloke. So Gwen, I see you on. Do you mind doing an intro of yourself?
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I hope we're all in Africa. And my name is Gwen Abiola Oloke. I was the former, up to recently, I was the former regional director for Growfin. And prior to Growfin, I had about 24 years experience in banking sector. And I left the banking sector as a bank CEO outside Nigeria. So really I've worked both in Nigeria and across West Africa, basically. So it's a pleasure to be here to share my experience with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwen. So Kara, if you can go to the next slide. Okay, so for those of you who are not familiar with Open Capital, or OCA as we call ourselves for short, we are a management consulting and financial advisory firm. We're 10 years old this year. We are headquartered in Nairobi, Kenya. And what we do, we work with across the ecosystem. So we work a lot with SMEs on traditional consulting work, so helping them think through their strategy, improve their operations, as well as get investment ready and raise capital. We work with ecosystem players, and on the investor side, structure funds, deploy capital, conduct due diligence, etc. and also with the ecosystem players in general. We have around 130 plus folks across working across sub-Saharan Africa, and we are located in Kenya, Kampala, Lusaka, and now Nigeria, where I'm based. In West Africa, our presence is newer. We've done a lot of work in East and Southern Africa, but we've been working, as you can see on the map, in West Africa a bit more, so for the last 4 years or so. And so about a year or 18 months ago, we decided to deepen our presence in West Africa. So we're actually in the process of opening an office here in Lagos to, do more in the region, to deepen our relationships, our network, and better support the companies and investors in this region. So as I mentioned earlier, I lead our work across West Africa, and across all the 20 plus countries in sub-Saharan Africa, we've completed over 600 projects and raised roughly around $600 million for our client through a network of 300 plus investors. So that's a bit about Open Capital. We're excited to host the session today and to meet all of you, and looking forward to getting to know you more through this session, as well as in future events and partnerships. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to take you through the fundraising process and a few best practices that we wanted to highlight. And as I mentioned, at the end of it, Gwen will come back and share, from her experience, some color around some of the themes that I'm going to talk about. Next slide, please. So the first thing we wanted to highlight as we were working through this, and when Joshua asked us to prepare this session, the key thing is, time when the question we asked Joshua is, okay, who's the audience for this? Is it entrepreneurs or is it ecosystem players? And Joshua said, okay, this is more on the ecosystem side. And as we're putting material on this, one of the key things that we realized, and we wanted to bring it up front, is this whole concept of, how people sometimes think that the fundraising process for ecosystem players is different from that of SMEs or entrepreneurs, when actually the fundamentals are the same. Right, the details of it are different for sure, but the fundamentals are the same. So the same thing an SME or an entrepreneur needs to do to fundraise for their business, essentially the same thing an accelerator or a fund has to work on to raise funds. So we wanted to kind of put that out there in case there's any misconception that both processes are different. Next slide. And one thing is, as I'm talking more from a process perspective, we have some time for Q&A at the end, but if some questions are coming up, feel free to send them through the chat, and so we can compile them for the Q&A period as well. So you don't have to necessarily wait for the Q&A period. You can start, putting your questions in the chat, and we'll try to address as many as we can. Okay. So in terms of the fundraising process, so we define it in 5 broad categories, right? So first, the initial meeting, initial due diligence, term sheets, more in-depth due diligence once we're sure we want to move forward, and then finally closing and investment. So we're going to talk through best practices at each of these level, but just here to kind of highlight the overall process. So at the initial stage, what you're really trying to do, and we call it an initial meeting, but really a lot of time it's a series, right, of conversations and meetings. But at that point, what the funders and the organization, and I use the organization broadly, right, because it can be an accelerator, It can be a PE firm, it can be an NGO. So using that broadly, what you're trying to do is to get to know each other. It's kind of like the dance, right? For when you're looking to figure out if you want to date somebody and whatnot. So you're just trying to get to know each other, find out more, and see if in terms of vision or in terms of what your objectives and your strategy, if there's alignment there, so that you can take it to the next level of the relationship. And then for the due diligence, you share a bit more about each other. So again, if you think about the dating game, so you start to share a bit more information and disclosing more, and try to figure out again if there's that alignment, right? And then and then moving into negotiation and term sheet. So at that point, it's not necessarily binding, but you start to try and define broad stroke some terms of the initial agreement of how the structure of the deal could look like, and again making sure that we are aligned and we want to take this one step further, right? And that moves us into step 4, which is the further due diligence, and that's where they go deep, right? The funders will go deep. They will ask you for more details on your financial. They will really open all the door, look at all the nooks and creaks, and really make sure that there's full visibility into as much as possible into the business, right? Before, or the organization, before making the decision that yes, we want to put some funds into this organization, which leads to the last steps, closing an investment, where the due diligence is done, everybody's happy, that all the legal documents have been drafted, the disbursement conditions are all set, everybody agrees and sign the life away, and then the money is dispersed. When you think about that process for a business, maybe you're talking about 3 to 6 months. If you're talking about a fund, the process will be much longer, and an NGO, if you're looking at grants, it will be shorter, etc. So those the amount of time that you spend at each step will change. Some of the details in terms of information that the funder will want to look at, or the process will slightly change, but fundamentally this is the process that you would go through if you're trying to raise funds. Okay, so let's now go into a little bit more depth at each of the steps, and what can you expect and what are some of the best practices that in our experience we've seen work. Next slide, please. Okay, thanks. So initial meeting, right? So as I mentioned, that's the initial dance, and where we're dating, we're trying to get a feel for each other and try to understand if there's a potential fit and match here. So what you can expect as an organization, you need to, you're selling, you're the one coming, you're the one courting and wanting this relationship. So you have to sell your idea. So if you're an accelerator and you're trying to raise funds to support SMEs to do that idea has to be really clearly articulated. Or if you're an investor and you want to raise fund to invest in women businesses, right? So what's that idea that you have? How are you going to do it? What's the model? How is it going to look different from what other people are doing? What's the impact objective that you're trying to have? Right? So really articulating those clearly is going to be key. The leadership team, right? Because funders, they don't only invest in an idea, but they typically invest in a team. So it's going to be key for them to understand what's that leadership team, what's the experience that they bring thus far. The performance you've had to date, right? So if you're not a new organization, or if you are a fund and you've raised money before and you've had other funds, what's that performance that you've had to date and that trajectory, right? And what are you planning to use the capital you're requesting for, and what are the expectation for scale and sustainability? So having those things clearly articulated in your pitch, right, will be key, so that you can clearly communicate that to potential funders that you're looking at. So what are some of the things you need to consider and best practices to help you be able to articulate those thoughts? Is one, having a very clearly articulated rationale for what you want to raise and what you're raising it for. It sounds very basic and self-explanatory, but sometimes it's actually surprising of how many organizations cannot clearly articulate the rationale and what those funds are for, right? And so it's almost like that pitch. It has to be very clear. Second, understanding the funders' landscape. Because different funders are funding different things, so it's not depending on what you're trying to do. Different funders may be more appropriate to target. So understanding that landscape and understanding who is really important, because that will also help you tailor your pitch based on that funder's thesis and what they're trying to do. Right, so you have, yes, your basic pitch, which is what your rationale, what you're trying to do, but you may need to tweak and emphasize a few points here and there depending on who you're talking to. Another best practice is to phase out your outreach process. So there may be 10 potential funders that from your initial exercise you think would be ideal for you to target, but phasing that out help you ensure that you have enough time to talk to different investors. Are you learning from some conversation and then tweaking the conversation for the next one? And so you essentially pacing yourself throughout the process. Another point that's really critical is to assess fit. And it's really important to do it at each of the steps. So even initially, right? So again, it's like dating. So really early on, if there's some red flags, if you feel like this doesn't feel right, their investment thesis is really different from what I'm trying to do, or their style is really different. For me, they may not be the right fit for you. It could be a great organization, but maybe not for you, and that's okay. So it's really important to, the earlier you figure that out, the better it is, because you wouldn't have spent too much time on that process. But really, it's something, that fit issue is something you want to assess at each step, and it's never too early to figure out if there's no fit and you want to end the process. But if after those initial conversations you decide that this is something that is working and there seems to be a fit, then it makes sense to move forward to the next step, which is the initial due diligence. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay. So initial diligence, and at that step, what you expected to do is to start sending some documents, right? So the funder is going to start asking for some documents, because they want to start ascertaining what you've told them about, what it is that you try to do. So they might want to review some of your financials. They might want some details around the management team that you're putting forth, and they may, depending on the organization, they might want to better understand the broader environment and ecosystem that you are, that the country or the sector is functioning under. So they'll start asking a series of questions, and it's important at this point to be as thorough as you can and be very prompt. So some of the things and best practices to do is, because you're going to go through this process across multiple funders, is to start building that documentation so you can clearly articulate and sell to the funder what it is that they want to know, right? And having those things in place. You definitely at this point want to consider putting some confidentiality agreement in place, because you're going to be sharing some pretty confidential stuff. So you want to have those NDAs in place so that you're sure that you're protecting yourself. I think also having your systems and ready so that you can easily and promptly share the information would be key. And last but not least, looking to institutionalize that knowledge, right? So as new questions come up, like answering them, but keeping them in, having a running list or running repository where you're capturing those question and answers is key, because other funders will ask you the same question, so you don't want to always restart from scratch, and you have that bank of information that you can easily share to make the process quicker. Okay. Third, next slide. Okay, term sheets. And at this point, this is where we're starting to have to negotiate, broad stroke, what the agreement might look like. And at this point, you likely need to negotiate things like it can be decision authority around certain things, level of control. So it's really important to know what your non-negotiables are, and where there's room for negotiation when you're having those conversations. And you definitely want to make sure you cover, like if you have a question, ask it, right? So make sure you cover all aspects as much as possible. Make sure you get things in writing. Make sure you negotiate against the terms, and where can you move and where you can. So if there's the investors, they want to sign off on board decisions, or do they want to sign off on like the companies that get selected for your program. So what are all those decisions and controls that they want? So, and really make sure that you are comfortable at the end of the day with the terms, because it's really hard, even though at this point it's not binding, it's really hard to then later on, walk back. Right, so especially because sometimes we're cautious, like, oh, we'll figure it out later. Let's cover it as much in detail here, because what you want to avoid is down the line some issues come up that were not discussed earlier, and it's creating delays, it's creating the deals breaking down when all this time and money and effort has been spent. So really try to come up with your list of non-negotiables, and be clear that at this point you're really comfortable with what is being discussed here, and get counsel at this point. It'll be quite helpful. Next slide. So further due diligence. So this is where, because before signing off and making sure that the final agreement is in place, this is where the in-depth due diligence happen, right? And so that's really intensive. They may come and visit you. They might want to interview the team. They want all the details on the financial. It's going to take a lot of time from your leadership team to respond to all of those things. And that's why I'm like, if early on you can realize that this is not a fit, or you can agree on key terms, it's much better, because at this point you're spending a lot and you're sharing so much about your organization. And even if it's a grant, right, like you're filling all these forms, providing all these details, that you want to make sure that this is something that looks likely that would work. right? So some of the best practices to consider here is have high quality records so that it's easy to respond to things. Document. So send written response to everything. Again, be ready for the time that is going to take, and if you're going to share something, like, be honest and transparent, because this is also about building trust, right? So give them accurate information. If something you don't feel comfortable to share, I mean, at this point you have to disclose. So that's why it's important to have all these NDAs and things in place, because you have to disclose. Like, you're entering a marriage, so you want to make sure that you disclose, you're building that trust, and you're all on the same page to decide to. Next slide. Okay, so closing. So at this point, again, we've spent all this time due diligencing, talking. Now we've agreed on the terms. It's time to sign. So again, at this point, let's making sure, because things might have ebbed and flowed all through the process. So it's really important to go through everything, make sure all the legal documents are in place, that everything checks, that you've reviewed you know, all the terms and conditions, and you are full alignment with that. It takes time on the funder side, because on their side too, they have their own process to get things approved from their board and whatnot, to sign off on things. So there could be actually a couple of months, right, a long period before to close. So at least, so as much as from your side, as much as you can control it, try to be prompt in reviewing and signing things. Make sure you have the right counsel to review things. Because again, once things are signed, right, you don't want to sign something and then later on something comes up and then the terms are pulled and you weren't adequately protected. So really important to make sure you have the right counsel and that you are really comfortable with all the terms that have been, you know, described here. Next slide. So a few other things that we wanted to highlight is that it's not just about the money, right? Because sometimes we think, oh, I just want, it's the funding, I'm trying to raise this much, but there's also a lot of other benefits that can come from the fundraising process that need to be taken into account. The first one is rapport, really important, because again, it's a long-term relationship. It's almost like a marriage, not quite, but almost, right? So you want to make sure that there's alignment in terms of strategy, in terms of vision, even in terms of style and expectation with the funder, especially as things come up. You know, like right now, we're going to talk about COVID in a bit, right? So as things come up, you want to be able to be ideally in a partnership where you can go present your issues. You can, it's a partnership, you can work together. So don't just look at the amount they're giving and the terms, but, you know, try to see if there's that rapport and that fit. They're really important. The second thing is that beyond the financial support, some of the funders can provide other benefits that are really helpful. So it could be an access to a network, right, or to subject matter experts or industry insight, etc., or, you know, networks of partners that you can tap into by being part of their investee network. So those are also really critical things to think about and see how you can, you know, how you can leverage. And then last but not least, that long-term strategy that goes back again to the initial point around rapport. So making sure you have similar vision and philosophy on the long-term sustainability and path for your business, because all of those things make the relationship much stronger and long-term much more beneficial than just looking at a transaction in terms of funds. So that said, those are some of the key best practices that we wanted to highlight along each of the steps of the fundraising practices. As I mentioned earlier, if you have some questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. But at this point, I would like to invite Gwen. So Gwen, if you can come back on video and share with us. We have a few questions here for you, but really we want this to be you sharing right to the group what your experience has been, what are some of the challenges that faced, and then some lessons that you've learned along the way that can be beneficial to the group.
Thank you very much, Natalie. I think you did a lot of justice to this subject. So good afternoon, everybody. I just have a few minutes to, I don't know what to take away or what to add to what Natalie has said, but I will just try and share some personal experiences. So first of all, like she said, fundraising, I think it's the same thing across all sectors. The principles really are the same. These are universal principles, but perhaps adaptation and a future and there. So from banking industry where I worked for many years, of course, many of us on this platform realize that bankers are in the business of raising funds, so that they can begin to deploy that and in form of loans and assets. So that principle really is basically the same thing. So from my personal experience, I think I would say that there are a few broad stages, and which reflected some of the challenges that were expressed by the respondents when they asked what were your greatest challenges. So pre the fundraising event itself, okay, you decide that you want to raise funds. There's a lot of work really that has to go in there. A lot of research that has to go in there. Understanding really what you want to do. Like I said, it may sound easy, but sometimes you really want to make that understanding very obvious and resonate with the audience that you're trying to approach. So really segmenting your funders, because the funders will tell you that they have funds, but they don't know, they haven't seen the right matches. The fund seekers are saying they have projects, but they have found the right funders. So how do you have that effective and cost-effective matchmaking process? So it's very important that we do that research. Now, part of that research is not only just maybe going online, being in networks, I think is very important from what we found out. People really love to do business with people they know or people that they are referred to. So when you are introduced by someone who is in your ecosystem, it gives you a leg in the door. It makes the entire a lot warmer than if you just sent an email, a cold email, to a prospective funder. So from my experience, that research requires you knowing who knows who can introduce you to who, and that first comes after you've identified exactly who do you want to, target and talk to. So that's your prospecting phase. So you put them in segments. Are you looking for philanthropy? Are you looking for commercial funding? Sometimes we have a social project and then we are talking to commercial funders. So the alignment is also very important. Now, from my experience, I think that the funding community, which is predominantly developing community, there's a lot of emotions attached to the money. So like Natalie said, it's not just about raising the funds. They want to have emotional connections to not just what you're doing, to the end users of your investors. So for example, they would like to connect with your success stories. Who are the beneficiaries, ultimate beneficiaries of these funds? What impact has it made? So telling a compelling story that it's not just about showcasing what you do, but how that fund has moved from just being you know, financial objects into, you know, social objects, into affecting lives, improving lives, touching lives. So that storytelling part is very important. So within your fund process, fundraising strategy, you must have the ability, if you don't have that resource in-house, you search for that resource. Be able to tell a story that has some emotional activation. From my experience as well, we realized that even when you identify the funder and you've supplied of almost every information that you've given, in the development industry, we found that speed is also important. But again, we noticed that fundraising is a process that is time consuming. So when I say speed is important, there's a lot of turnover. We found that there's a lot of turnover in the institutions. So you may be talking to somebody whom you met, who connects with your vision, understands what you're doing, and has been able to sell your project or your initiative to the organization. And unfortunately, the person leaves that seat. You're almost like starting all over. And then the question is, oh, this is an institution. They should have this information already in their system. Why are they asking the same questions that Ms. X was asking us 18 months ago? Yeah, that's important. Don't forget that fundraising is you're talking to an individual in that institution. So that individual also needs to buy into your story in such a way that they can, because they have alternatives. You're not the only fund seeker. So they have several proposals just as compelling as yours that are in front of them. So that personal connection is so important that we make that. So that brings me to the issue of how you engage the funders. There must be a personal touch to that engagement. So what happens, we found was that it's effective. You must have a resource internally that is very people-oriented. You'll have some people that they are natural, you know, they know how to, they are very charismatic, they can present and communicate, you know, an issue and an idea in a very convincing and compelling way, in an emotionally connecting way, you know. So you must find people like that with those traits. So it may not be a fundraising department if you're not that big, but if you do have a fundraising department, make sure that the person has those personality traits to be able to connect emotionally, you know, with the funders. So usually what we do, what is in this situation is to have like a team where you have such a person driving the process and coordinating everybody. Because in fundraising, information is required from all areas of your business. And you could be the CEO, but you would not have access to all that information. So you need somebody who is a people's person, who is also very pragmatic and project management focused, that can coordinate all of this internally and also externally. Now, fundraising, from what Natalie said, is a long-term issue, from when you start till when you exit that relationship. So you also want a funder that will give you, you know, multiple and subsequent series of funding. So you just don't want a one-off funder, and you want a donor that will be with you in the lifetime of your organization. So that means you must have a strategy for sustaining that relationship. From my experience, we found that sometimes organizations really kind of relax once the funders come in, putting as much effort in sustaining that relationship post the donation or post the injection of that capital. And usually you have a lot of friction. Now, in some instances, the office is responsible for the initial fundraising process. It's not the same office that is responsible for managing and monitoring that investment. So you must understand how the structure works in the funders institution, and be sure that all of these relationships are managed, you know, effectively. Post-investment, you have a new set of people, and then you can connect with them. Now, one key challenge that we also found that in fundraising, it's consistency in information. Okay, for example, like Natalie said, most of all these expectations will have been put down in the fundraising, in the fund agreement. The regularity of your returns, what kind of returns they're expecting, who should send them, who you should send them to. All of this information is usually there. But a lot of times, both sides kind of have some deviations. So if you have a new person coming to that seat, even though it's a policy, but how that policy is implemented, okay, it's totally different from the expectation or the perception of that officer or that incumbent. So it's important that you have a structure in place so that irrespective of who is an incumbent in that position, you know, there's a standard of reporting, a standard of monitoring, and a standard that is kept, you know, between both organizations. So I'll tell you a story from my previous employment. So we had this donor. Of course, there was an alignment. Before the donor brings the money, the capital, there's always an alignment. Now, subsequent upon that, 2 or 3 years down the line, we have some new people coming to the organizations. And you'll be amazed that we're almost going to rewrite the fund agreement. So even though the organization has an alignment, there are organizational alignments, but the interpretation of that alignment actually changed with the incumbents that were on that seat. Now, Natalie also talked about changes that can happen in the course of even this relationship. So if, for example, there was an alignment around gender inclusion or youth, but dynamics can change in the macroeconomics of that environment that requires some, you know, alterations in how you implement, you know, those goals and objectives. So there must be a constant communication, you know, between both organizations. So you can tell that in fundraising, relationship, from what I've said, research and relationship is key prior until the end of the fundraising relationship. So I think this is a few of the things, rather than to avoid the risk of repeating what Natalie has said, these are some of the experiences we've had and challenges we've had. So we can take some questions if you have them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gwen. This is great. I think we had, I noticed one question in the chat, so we can address that. And then if there are other questions, please drop them in the chat and we can address them as well. So the question I saw in the chat came from Toki. I hope I'm saying your name right. It says, what would be some strategies for sustaining the relationship with the funder? Gwen, I think this lines well with what you were just talking about. So do you want to take that question? Or you on mute?
Yeah, thank you very much. Very key question. So a lot still goes back to what I talk about research. Now, when you talk about relationship, there's relationship at the corporate level and there's relationship at the individual level. It's very important that both relationships, both levels of those relationships are managed. Now, at the corporate level, you have the decision-making level, you have the implementation level. So it's important that you recognize who are those that are key at the decision-making level, which is like the authorization level. And then of course, at the, you know, desk level now, because the decision makers will rely on the implementers or the analysts or whoever is at the desk level for information. So it's not just enough to have information, manage the relationship at that micro level. You must be able to manage it at that macro level. So what happens in organizations is to have the same levels of relationship at your own organizations. So while you have somebody or a group of people like the leadership team, ensuring that the relationship at the leadership level, at the C level in the other organization is maintained. That could be through sharing of information, ensuring that you attend you're just interacting. One good way to do that professionally is to always try and be at the same event. Form a community where you are interacting outside just your fundraising issue. So when you're within those communities, there are other issues you're engaging that enhances the relationship between the parties at that C-level. So the C-level relationship is so critical, very, very important. Now at the bottom of the pyramid level, also you must ensure that information is also exchanged. Now at this both of these levels, there are relationships. You think about the cultures, you think about the nuances of the organizations. You must, all of these things, come into play. But I think in summary, managing the relationships at the C level and also at the bottom level is very important for the two institutions. Does that answer the question, Luki?
Yep, it says thank you.
All right.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think the other thing I want to add there is it's those things that we all know we need to do, but we don't always do it, right? So it's kind of like that upfront stakeholder management strategy, right? That you need to do upfront, and understanding who the different stakeholders are. Like Gwen said, what food do you need to inform, who is the decision maker, etc. Mapping that and taking into account their personality, style, and all of that in developing how you engage with them. So some people tend to be, or some organizations are much more structured. And in any case, you kind of have those structures, touch point, whether it's quarterly reports or meetings, etc. But then beyond that, there's also the human aspect where you build those relationships so that when there's issues, you have things, relationship built against which you can then leverage in key moments like now, right, during COVID, when people are going back to some of their funders for additional funds, or when there's an issue to help address. So spending that time up front to have a clear stakeholder management strategy and building that is really key, especially when issues arise on the front end or later on in the process. Great. I don't see any other, I think, okay, there's a question that just came in from Zugo. How would you go about setting in place the structure to maintain that consistency in relationship for new relationships? For me, like one thing, and then Gwen, you can add, is making sure you have from the get-go meetings in place, as I was mentioning, like whether it's quarterly touch points and whatnot. So that already gives you a basic, right? So you use those opportunities to provide updates and engage with your funders. So that's something you need to do systematically. But on top of that, when it comes to the more personal level, then it depends on each person. So some people it's just as typical relationship building. Some people it might be once in a while just checking in. It could be sending an article on the industry or something that could be of interest to them. It can be participating in industry meetings and whatnot, where you see them and you connect. So there's so many different avenues, but you have to kind of tailor it to the individual and the circumstance. Gwen, not sure if there's other ideas you want to share on how to set in place the structure.
Yeah, I think you said something which I like to emphasize, is institutionalizing the relationship. So this regular calls that are institutional, is very, very important. And also ensuring that all the expectations as in the agreement, especially when it comes to reporting and monitoring, that's around that. That's the first point. You must be very professional around that. So just to add to you, I think when we institutionalize those regular meetings, like in our case, we had, apart from the quarterly meetings that we had for advisory committee or the board meetings, we had a monthly meeting with the operators, so not at the C level, you know. So we shared, there was an agenda that was shared based on areas of interest. And when you have those regular meetings, it kind of enhances the relationships, you know, between both parties. But then it is structured, and irrespective of who comes on that seat, will ensure that those things are done, you know, on an ongoing basis.
Sounds good. Okay, so just for time check, I think we need to move to the next part of the agenda. So what I want to do, so next slide is to now zoning a little bit on COVID and the fundraising process. So I'm going to pass over to Keru, who's going to walk us through some of the key trends that we've seen happening in COVID and how that has affected the fundraising process. And Joshua, on your side, I think we should get ready after Keru walks us through the trend to move participants into breakout rooms for the discussions. So Keru, over to you.
Thanks, Natalie, for that. So as Natalie mentioned, for this session, we'll be focusing on what has been the impact of COVID. What are some of the trends that we are seeing during this COVID? So from what we have seen, is there is much more now tendency in terms of the use of technology. Since we're not going there in person, travel has halted in some countries, even though there are now been some reopenings happening in depending on which country you're in. But still, how do you safeguard people by maintaining that social distancing? So one of the things to connect and to continue to fundraise is the use of technology. So even what we're using right now, the video streaming like Zoom, we have live streaming where you have seen various groups live stream what are some of the events they are undertaking or what they're thinking around in terms of their response to COVID. I think that's something that we have seen. Then the second thing is in terms of even the rise in fundraising efforts. So with COVID, one of the things that has come up and in dire need is around health matters, about sanitation, because we want to ensure we maintain hygiene. So a lot of funders are now focusing to or have shifted or repurposed their funds towards these efforts around health, sanitation, and ensuring that people have food, even as we maintain social distancing. And so based on that, we have also seen a rise and redesign of financing solutions. So you have seen various COVID response investment vehicles. So for instance, we have the African Rising COVID-19 Solidarity Fund that now brings together where people from different communities can even provide funding, and various ecosystem players can also provide funding at the same time. So with this response funds, it's helping even to provide sustainability or being able for these ecosystem players or even organizations to continue with provision of their services. Another one is like Open Africa, where they are providing loans to businesses that are around so debt financing in terms of response to COVID. So those are some of the things that we have seen, more targeted financing solutions when it comes to COVID. And I think what is important is how do you, as ecosystem player, like target or tap into some of these funds. Then the fourth point, and I think everyone is doing this, is to repurpose the funds, so both the funders, but also ecosystem players as well, to support organizations so that they were supporting during this pre-COVID. So like going back to the drawing board and asking what are some of the things that either are working, how can you shape to ensure that yes, we are sustaining or supporting those organizations that before COVID, so they are more sustainable even during this time. So I think those are the top 4 trends we are seeing. And so what we would like, in the interest of time, would like to break out into groups and answer this in each team. answer these 4 questions. I know at the beginning we had what are some of the challenges, which was very eye-opening in terms of what are some of those challenges that we are facing, what are some of the impacts, and how has that changed the fundraising strategy, and then what are some of the practices that have worked well for you. Then after the group discussion, we one from each team, the representative who is share with the team for about 1 to 2 minutes about what you have discussed. So we let maybe Joshua, maybe over to you in terms of the grouping. Yeah, so that we can now have this discussion, and then later on we can close with the key takeaways. Over to you, Joshua.
Thank you, Carol.
Right. Carol, I think most folks are back. You want to quickly take us through?
Yeah, sure. So I hope you heard, I know it was very short time to discuss. Even for my group, we didn't finish like the whole discussion, but I hope that you got very useful insights from the discussion. So we will have various representatives from each group share back with the rest of us, of the team, on terms of what some of the challenges, what are some of the, what impact has COVID had in terms of fundraising efforts, and then what has changed. How has that changed fundraising, and what practices are you adopting or has been working well for you so far? So maybe we start with group 1. Anyone from group 1?
Maybe if you're the representative of group 1, just unmute yourself. Yep. and talk. Otherwise, we can go to group 2 and come back to group 1 to make sure we stick to time.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone from group 2?
Yes, I want to believe group 2 was us, myself, Olusiji, and then Edwin. So right. What we did was a brief discussion. First of all, we established that, especially within this COVID period, donors, we need to understand the donor in terms of what they look out for. One is that donors may want to see impacts of what they are putting their resources into. And so as an organization, we need to be very careful, and in particular about the execution, in order to drive home that result that they are looking out for, to meet their specific need in terms of results. We also highlighted the challenge of capacity, in that sometimes, especially for younger organizations new to the fundraising space, there's always that expectation of some leadership demonstration in terms of the team. That will be, I think that was alluded to earlier. There also needs to be a demonstration of credibility in terms of the years of work, and mostly new fundraising organizations don't have those. So we identified the opportunity of offering consultation services, especially if you have that capacity. Then you can, we as organizations, we may want to use that to develop that sense of credibility that we may be lacking at the initial stages, and over time we would have developed that those qualities to leverage on for fundraising purposes. And it was highlighted also that through this meeting we're having, we would be able to develop the capacity to raise very huge funds. That's the end of our discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. Maybe over to group 3. Anyone from group 3?
Yeah. So I mean, I was in group 3. This is Joshua. So most of the people in our group actually get to speak. But one of the things we discussed, even though the time was brief, was in terms of aligning the processes of what you're doing in terms of your program and your activities with what the founders are actually looking at. So one thing that happened in time of COVID is actually the perspective of the founders has also changed, what they are focusing on. A lot of them are now focusing on health-related activities. So one thing we are trying to do now is to see how actually we are actually fitting what we are doing our programs into what the funders are looking at, which mean changing your the scope of your program, but of course, which aspect of your program actually fits into what the funders are looking at this time, or probably changing your strategy in terms of looking out other funders who might actually have alignment with what your program is about. So that's what we're able to discuss in the group.
Great, thanks, Joshua. Maybe to group 4. Anyone from group 4?
Okay. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Okay, so I really don't know the group number, so to put, but for my group, so while we discuss the challenges that are being faced so far, so some of the challenges that we highlighted were really for organizations that didn't have like so much visibility on as far as being well known and digital presence before the COVID happened. So that has made it a bit difficult to fundraise for projects, because so this is not a period where you can have you can be moving around, go meet partners, or where partners can come to your organization to see what you do and what you've done so far. So when when you're not visible, when you do not have that digital presence, well known online, maybe our websites and things that talk so much about what you do, so it's difficult to want to fundraise and for partners to buy into what you do. So that's what I'm faced so far.
Great.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Maybe group 5. Zugo, I know you are in the same group.
All right, good afternoon. So for us, we first wanted to understand the landscape after the COVID situation arose. So we realized that most of our fundraisers wanted to put funding now into COVID-related initiatives. So we had to do a lot of transformation, both in terms of being digital to reach these funders, as well as in our own programs themselves. And we needed to also respond quickly, because we noticed that the people that we served, our customers and the people that we provided solutions for, they were actively seeking our own indulgence and solutions, because they were having issues themselves with the COVID situation. And so that caused a lot of transformation in our own programs and in how we delivered it from in-person to digital. And even in our budgets and all the other activities we did, we had to tailor them to be able to have content that addressed the COVID situation. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks. Maybe one from group 1, anyone who hasn't maybe represented their group.
I think I was in group 1, and one key thing that Felix shared with us that was very important as in terms of challenges, when you are like a network also, and you are still relatively new, and you're trying to write proposals, bid for project, and you find out that people that are in your network are also bidding for the same project. So while you are new, you don't have that much of pipeline that you can raise money from, but the little pond you could also raise money from is the same pond that your network members are trying to raise money from. So it's like competing with your members. And so we talked about that's one of the challenges that they are to face as in. So, and it also has to do with what we talked about in terms of building credibility, building experience, and then being able to justify that you have the ability to do the project. As in, so that's one challenge that I think Felix raised. I don't know, Felix, maybe you want to use this time to talk more about that, and we couldn't talk more on how they could overcome that challenge, but that was something that we discussed.
I think you hit the nail right on the head, so that's what I meant.
Great. Yeah, thanks all for sharing what you have discussed in your groups. I wish we had more time. I felt like we needed more time to discuss what are some of the challenges, impact, and what are some of the practices. In the interest of time, wanted to more or less, what are some of the key takeaways? And hopefully at the end, we can have maybe a small Q&A session. So before we close, I think one of the things that have come out, even from the discussions, have been clearly define your rationale. So clarity is very key on what you're raising and in terms of even capital. And I think this was even emphasized when Natalie was discussing the fundraising process, as well as Gwen sharing her own experience when it comes to fundraising. And then build your case for support. I think it's the same case. Here is why do you need that support? And then revise your fundraising strategy, but don't lose momentum. I think that was even emphasized even by Gwen when she was sharing her experience, like do not lose momentum. Even once you get the financials, continue communicating. And then use digital platforms to connect. So we have, I know this is the time to develop. If you don't have a website, you now focus efforts towards building that or building your social media platform so that you can connect with various people and also various funders, and then deepen those relationships with existing funders. Just know that we are in this together. It's that something that is that everyone is facing this uncertainty around COVID. So it is very important to just know how your existing funders are doing, and that way even you can continue building that relationship. Even not necessarily, it might not be necessary for fundraising, but they can be able to connect you with other funders. And then collaborate with community and government and other organizations. I think this is very important to see what are the efforts you are, as an organization, providing towards COVID. And I think most of the funders are appreciating, or what we have seen, they're appreciating that more organizations being involved in their communities or with their government or other organizations to support in terms of their response with COVID. So these are some of the key takeaways, but I think even during from the groups, the additional ones, which in terms of building that credibility, which could be more on point 1 and 2, aspect of digital aspect, which is the use of digital platforms, and even in terms of the team. How do you ensure that the team is built up to, so that even to provide that credibility? So I think that's the key takeaways. Maybe in terms of closing, I know we are like at the doors of 4:30, but maybe just to over to Natalie to maybe close, and then hopefully we can hand over to Joshua in terms of closing. Thank you. Over to you, Natalie.
Yes, thank you, Kero. This was a great session. I mean, it went by so fast, but great discussion. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Joshua, for the opportunity to facilitate this session. I know we are over time, so I'm just going to pass it over to you if there's any closing remarks to share with the team before closing.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, everyone. We just want to say we appreciate you joining this call this afternoon. And like I mentioned earlier, this is a series of webinars, workshops rather. We have a like workshop around innovative destructuring in time of crisis, which is with Megan from Acumen, which is going to host on the 15th of September. And of course, like I mentioned, this particular fundraising session is going to be 2 sessions. So which the second session is actually going to host the continuation of this. We'll host on the 9th of September. I'm sure you can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see, Joshua.
Okay, so which we're going to be asking Flora. Flora is our senior partnership associate at Andy. Also going to be talking about from the group perspective, working in Andy on the fundraising team, how it has been and how you can actually also do better with fundraising in time of crisis like this. So on this note, we're going to end this session. If you have any question, please feel free to reach out to us further. We'll be communicating via email. And if you have not registered for the second session and other upcoming sessions, please do register. You'll get email from Confidence after this session or probably tomorrow. And of course, I will also use the opportunity to mention about the Andy Annual Conference, which is actually open. The deadline is soon. The initial deadline was last Friday. But of course, we've announced the extension of the deadline today. So if you are interested in attending the annual conference, please also register for that. Yeah, so Confidence put the link to the registration for the next workshop in the chat. But if the Discord ends and you can't get it, please reach out to us and you'll be able to get the link. And for other workshops coming up between now and January 2021. Thank you so much, everyone. Is there any last comment from anyone before we end this call? All right. In the absence of comment, I want to say thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you so much, Natalie, Kure, and Gwen. Really appreciate you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
I have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everybody.